God, how hard is it to just end a game? Do you know what I mean? Like, hello and welcome to Vision Denial and World Watch. My name is Sam, and if you're new here, I've watched every single playoff game or whatever equivalent they want to call it in given regions of all the participating regions and that are participating at Worlds. I've done this for years and years and years and years. And if you're new here, I do a weekly analysis of each one of them. And if you want to see what my analysis of them are on a game-to-game, you'll watch them later. But if you want to watch them as soon as I've finished seeing one of them, I have a link down below of the TikToks in question that I post up there of every single one of them, each about like minute to 2 minutes of reviews. We are currently going to be covering, and I'm just going to double check over here, the playoff games running from July 30th to August 5th. Ooh, excuse me. So not quite a week, or no, a week worth of full of them. Last time we had talked about a number of things regarding expectations and consistencies and confidence and proactivity. This week, we're going to go through some of these particular playoffs and also talk about the nature of vision, being able to close out games, and the lack of world caliber teams so far, as next week we'll be having a bunch more regions. We still have only the LJL, the LCS, the LLA, and the LPL currently playing their games. Next week is when the LCK, CBLL, PCS, and LEC start their games. Or no, the LEC is a little later. That being said, let's take a look at this last week's worth of games. And we're back with China's LPL upper bracket semi-final. We got Bilibili Gaming versus JD Gaming, and congratulations to JD Gaming on being the first team to qualify for Worlds. Now, this is the 7th series and technically 5th best of 5 that these two teams have this year, or have played each other this year, and JD Gaming wins every single one. Now, this result is to be expected from these two teams, so at least, but, what can we garner from this? Well, both teams are terrifying, but one has a step up on the other when it comes down to coordination, neutral setup, vision play, and most other aspects when it comes down to this series. What does this mean, really, for Bilibili's upcoming series against LNG? I expect them to still win, despite LNG's upward momentum. One bad matchup doesn't change the fact of how terrifying Bilibili is as a team. It just means that we know of one team that can beat them where others can't. My MVP for this series is Knight, who continued poke and pressure created a lot of issues for Bilibili's team fight approach. And we're back with Japanese LJL lower bracket round 1. We got Burning Core versus AXIZ, and this is the first reverse sweep of the series that we're reviewing. I was expecting this to be another slog or disappointing sweep, but a few things that both teams do genuinely impressed me. Firstly, early game vision play is rather excellent, better than most teams I've seen. I kind of wish they keep up this kind of play past the first 7 minutes of the game, but this was also really nice. The coordination these two teams showed also impressed me. Not perfect, but impressive. I was expecting a lot more disjointed play and poor target selections out of them, but those were rarely present. Now, do I think that AXIZ will make the distance? Doubtful. There are many issues that arise when you look at the granular aspect of their play. They are proactive, but rushed and with questionable macro decisions. They have a solid sense of their win conditions, but overforce many plays in that pursuit, and that backfires, and also kind of slows down the game. The matter of the first 2 games of the series looking lost is honestly just not lost on me. Reverse sweeps are cool, but the honesty of it is that Burning Core easily could have won many of those games and fumbled just as hard as they played well. My MVP of this series is Hoglet, whose proactive approach to the early and late game jungling helped AXIZ keep control of the series. And we're off. Back in China's LPLs, this time in the lower bracket for the semifinal, we've got ourselves Bilibili Gaming versus LNG Esports, and oh boy, no one expected this result. Now, people thought that Bilibili was going to be the heavy favorites, and after game one, most had that idea confirmed. But the following draft, adding so much complexity against a team that has continuously shown improvements series after series with strong coordination, vision play, and much improved map rotation and macro choices, LNG are becoming a team to be reckoned with. No doubt in my mind they will have a slot at Worlds. I thought third, but honestly, second, maybe first. It wouldn't even surprise me to see them win against JD Gaming to secure the first seed as a part of the rematch. Now, Bilibili, for their part, were doomed by hubris, trying to continuously outplay and outmatch a team that plays a lot closer to the level than they expected. They now wait to see if JD Gaming will win the finals and get Bilibili the second seed at Worlds via points, but in all honesty, I really need them to go through the regional qualifiers to kind of confirm what we expected from them. Their series against JD Gaming had the expected results. JD Gaming has been the better against Bilibili for the entire year, but this particular series looked like they didn't have the right respect. My MVP of the series is Tarzan, who did a lot to nullify the impact that Shun usually has for Bilibili's success. And we're back with Latin America's LLA's lower bracket King of the Hill run. We've got Team Aze versus Isurus Gaming. And oh boy, in the LLA there is this bizarre phenomenon where lower seeded teams look way better than the higher seeded ones. And Isurus is no stranger to this. Now, Ace was expected to have a very clean victory, but instead, Games 2 through 4, Isurus implemented better vision, neutral setup, coordination, and more importantly, proactivity. Like, there's nothing more that I am more bothered by than teams who wait around for neutrals to come up, rinse, repeat, and only make plays around the major objectives. Isurus seems to be more consistent than any of the other teams in the league so far. Do I expect them to be World's caliber? Not from what I can see. They unfortunately hold some awkward approaches to the game, look a little lost early, and don't necessarily show that they understand their win conditions, primarily working around more of the strong team dynamic as a whole. And if those kinds of weaknesses come up during, on top of the frankly bizarre micro choices made, international teams will just eat it up. But from this series, I can see Isurus make the distance. My MVP of the series is Jelly, whose engage angles and options really propelled the team to success. And we're back with Latin America's LLA's lower bracket King of the Hill run. We got Infinity versus Isurus. Almost a reverse sweep. Isurus, began this series matching my expectations of them while also increasing my worries. Both teams have some solid adaptation, bizarre coordination, and macro choices that scratch my head a little bit. Isurus is by far the more proactive of the two teams while having a much weaker early game. While Infinity holds stronger fundamentals overall, their inability to close out games or even get any leads ballooning leads to many moments in which Isurus was able to come back from, and that's a worrying trend from them. Hopefully next year they'll fix that over. I have many issues with how this series played out. The ways that Infinity kept playing passive until errors were made, and how often unforced errors or overconfidence came from Isurus, just the whole thing really left a sour taste in my mouth. Isurus was my preferred team coming into this matchup, but the series has me concerned for how well they'll do overall in this, and for how well the region will do, because this was the team that had the more promising play so far, and it's not that much more promising. My MVP of the series goes to Gavoto, who for just being the more consistent player on the Rift in this series. And we're back with the North American LCS's lower bracket round 1. We got Team SoloMid versus Dignitas, and quite honestly, if this is TSM's last series, good riddance. Bye-bye. Holy shit, neither team here is ready for Worlds. They had a lot of solid approaches to the game, good neutral setups, draft adaptations, decent vision play. My biggest issue comes from the lack of proactivity from TSM, just being non-existent. And the macro choices also just being super out of place. Now, Dignitas is not much better. Both teams, in fact, have the same kind of issues, but it kind of feels more egregious coming out of Dignitas, who, especially on Game 4, just needed to get their solo laners to TP to the base at the end of the game instead of contesting the Elder Drake. I digress. And that would have been a Game 4 series instead of a 5-game one. All in all, looking at both of these teams, there is an understanding of how to play the game, but never with the right pieces or tools, leaving me under the impression that they really couldn't compete on the international stage. My MVP for the series is Santorin for his angles of approach regarding engage tactics. And we're back with Japan's LJL lower bracket round 2, Crystal Gaming Act versus Sengoku Gaming. There is nothing better than seeing just one team show up and wailing on the other who just waits for mistakes. The sarcasm is heavily implied. Sengoku Gaming showed some solid proactive play, good coordination, and a strong understanding of their win conditions while keeping everything else kind of serviceable. While Crystal Gaming Act had a lot of solid adaptations from game to game, but I seriously couldn't understand why they just waited for Sengoku to keep making mistakes around neutrals, or even when it's too late, 10,000 gold behind. This is the kind of team I expected Sengoku to be in the regular season, but it's not enough to convince me that they can compete against Detonation, especially as the two teams they have faced virtually just came to get their asses handed to them with no preparation in sight. My MVP for the series is Enti, who found so many solid engages that he alone was making Crystal Gaming Act quake in their boots. This was not a good series. And we're back with North America's LCS in the lower bracket for round 1. We got ourselves 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid. And honestly, you could not get two more indecisive teams together to play a series of reverse chicken. Team Liquid played the stronger vision, draft adaptation, neutral setups, and side lane approach, but when it came down to actually closing out the games, this is just one of the worst teams to do so. That, and combined with their inability to play around deficits, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Now, 100 Thieves is much worse in this regards. The indecisiveness and reliance on scaling drafts without the ability to actually play the early game, whereas we saw one game in which they were able to pull off what they wanted, off of a supposed fluke, kind of, because they lost the lead they got at level 1 and then regained it 15-20 minutes later. Because when they did have the lead, the coordination was solid. They had the right moves for it. Just this series, even as a win, confirms for me that 100 Thieves, and especially Team Liquid, is not a Worlds caliber team, and that they really need to fix their pacing and how to close out games for it to be so. My MVP of the series is Yan, who was the most consistent player out of the roster for Team Liquid. And we're back with China's LPL's grand final. So not quite the regionals, but the grand finals. We got ourselves LNG Esports versus JD Gaming, a grand finals rematch. First and foremost, congratulations to Bilibili Gaming on being the second team to qualify for Worlds. I really would have preferred they go through regionals and not LNG, who clearly showed non-stop improvement. Now, Honestly, LNG, this is a team whose ability to close out games and use early leads was kind of questionable, even as their fundamentals are incredibly solid. But in this series, much of those doubts are just put to rest completely. This team, I have no doubts, going into the regionals will secure the 3rd seed in the first series they play, if they don't choke, which sometimes happens in these. Well, JD Gaming show us an incredible amount of freaking coordination and some slow improvements regarding their neutral play, vision setups, and macro choices. JD Gaming is the team to beat going into Worlds off the back of 2 LPL titles and MSI Championship. They could be the first team to do the grand sweep of winning all year long. But we'll have to see as more teams qualify. Right now, this was the best series we got. My MVP of the series is Knight, who enabled his team excellently throughout the entire series. And we're back with Japanese LJL's round 2 lower bracket. We got ourselves AXIZ versus FENNEL. Oh boy. These kinds of series are really hard to analyze. When one team dominates a game, all you can really tell is how good are they at closing out games and how good is the opponent at adapting for the next one. In both regards, both teams perform poorly. I can say for a fact that FENNEL is the more coordinated team, and that is most likely a difference maker here. Otherwise, both teams suffer from poor vision denial, very rushed neutrals, bizarre macro choices, sometimes even worse micro choices, and again, the inability to close out games consistently. Like, FENNEL, come on. You had a strong 20,000 gold lead in one game, and we're still pushed off trying to just tying kills inside their base. Neither are World's caliber. My MVP of the series is Recap, who had some strong re-engages to turn some pretty big mistakes into some nice victories. And we're back with North America's LCS upper bracket round 2. We got ourselves Evil Geniuses versus Cloud9, and congratulations to Cloud9 on being the 3rd team to qualify for Worlds. Now, both teams showed some interesting adaptations, but mostly frustrations on their inability to close out games. Now, for the Geniuses, it's kind of worse, that they would take massive leads and have them thrown to the wayside for indecisions or overeager play. While Cloud9 just look like a team that's way too confident for their own good. Cloud9's vision is immaculate. They understand their win conditions. Their players are solid, some excellent coordination, and yet never did I think that this team would be able to go toe-to-toe with the top teams that would head to Worlds. They are the first team from the LCS that I would say is Worlds caliber, but just from this game with Evil Geniuses going toe-to-toe, but the messiness of it all, they're barely World's caliber, and I want to see a lot cleaned up before I feel confident about their position. My MVP for the series is Berserker, whose play was just fantastic to watch. There was a lot more quality games in this particular week. There's a lot less games compared to the last week's video, but there are a lot more quality games and a lot more confidence in some world caliber-ish teams. But only the 3 teams so far that I've qualified that I've watched. And just as a note, I'm filming this August 6th. I have not watched the August 6th games. I will be getting there, and that will be uploaded ASAP as soon as I get to that. But out of the 3 that I've watched so far, there are some that teeter close to being World's caliber, and only 4 or 5 teams really hit the mark on, yes, I have confidence they could compete at Worlds at a solid enough level. And I've mentioned last week that the proactivity is part of the issue, and some part of it is also the confidence. If teams are hesitating and are too slow at any given point, then it's not great. The other thing that I've consistently noticed is their ability to close out games. How often do I see a team with 6, 8, 10, 15,000 gold ahead in a position where they could close out a game feasibly, and there's just the inability to just get there. It is not okay. Like the most recent one, the last one that was in the that we watched, the Evil Genius game and the Cloud9 versus Evil Genius. Both of those teams had significant leads that they could have closed out games, and yet were unable to for way too long. Cloud9 especially, who came the closest so far in North America for me to give some confidence that they could compete, took forever with a near 20,000 gold lead. Or not 20, a near 14,000 gold lead the entire time. And had like 4-5 minutes of them going to the base and like losing trades or trading evenly. Like, it's not... And I attribute part of this as equivalent to the issues that I see with vision, where teams will sometimes either have very great vision early game or great vision late game, but not both, not the consistency for it. Very few teams even have the consistency of it, with even at the world's caliber level. And when I see that, I see a lack of planning, a lack of setup and preparation, an ability to really focus and dial in to what your win conditions are for your entire for the entire series, like for any individual game. If you do not have the vision, you are working off of instinct, gameplay sense, to outplay your opponents in a way that is just unhelpful, unnecessary. Why waste that time just faffing about? If you could just get the situation properly set up, you have full control of neutrals. If you don't have to like rush it to pull people in and then turn without the proper information, then you're like, oh, oops, so we got flanked. It happens too often. This should not be a problem of, if you're going to be a team that is going to win worlds, we cannot have it where you're just, our entire plan just gets because we didn't have the vision for it. The lack of preparation and setup is just kind of unacceptable. And unless I see a change of that with the next set of regions that come in with the LCK, PCS, CBLOL, if I see a change in that dynamic, which I doubt, maybe more with the LCK, but even then, the history of some of those teams, especially like T1, Hamwa Life, DRX, who are going in, don't tend to really do the preparation thing. I'm kind of worried about the state and quality of the games that we're going to be getting, or how easy it will be to see who's the absolute favorite, bar none. Those are my thoughts, at least. I don't have much more from this so far until more regions pop in, but the teams who have qualified are JDG, or JD Gaming, Bilibili Gaming, and Cloud9. Although Bilibili, I really wish would have gone through the regional qualifier, but they are still fairly solid, and I have no questions that they would have made it to Worlds regardless. So, without further ado, I want to hear your thoughts down below. Is there a particular, like, an exciting region that you're waiting for to start? Has there been a playoff so far that's been really good, that you've really enjoyed, or one that you're looking forward to? Or what are your thoughts about the lack of vision, lack of preparation, the inability to close out games? How does that tie with the confidence? I'd love to hear your thoughts and everything down below. I appreciate everybody who's watching. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day.